Welcome, everybody. My name is Derek Weber with the Conflux, and I've got Ethan King here, a good friend of mine, which I'm excited to introduce here in just a moment. So the Conflux webinar series, so this is really, all about how do we curate content and connections that help people be better at their business and just better in general in life. And today is really no exception. There's been a lot of things going on in the news and the media and in our country. And what we keep hearing from a lot of our members and our customers and just people in the community is there's just a lot of confusion. There's confusion about what to do, what not to do, what to talk about, what not to talk about. And Ethan and I have been good friends for a while, and I'll give him a second here in a minute to introduce himself. But he and I have been having some amazing conversations over the last month. And at one point, he and I both said, you know what, these are conversations that we wish more people could hear. And so that's what we're really going to try to do today. Is Ethan and I are going to have a really good conversation about really difficult things and answer some questions that were sent in from some attendees and guests. There are questions that are hard questions. They're hard because they're ones that are difficult. There's no right answer. There's lots of opinions and there's lots of different perspectives. But we felt it was important for us to do our part in sharing our knowledge, our experiences as entrepreneurs, as business owners, as leaders in our community, and hopefully to really encourage more interesting conversations to happen around the dinner tables and in our communities. So Ethan and I have known each other for several years. We were both presidents of Entrepreneurs Organization our respective chapters. So Ethan is an entrepreneur out of Atlanta, Georgia, and was president of EO Atlanta. At the same time, I was president of EO St. Louis. So we've known each other for years and have had lots of experiences and lots of conversations, lots of late night drinks at bars and lots of great conversations. And most recently, we're actually at the Global Leadership Academy, where brought together 30 entrepreneurs from around the world that came together to focus on how do you become a more impactful leader. And once again, lots of great conversations, lots of great insights. And so he and I have this level of trust and understanding of each other, which is really what it takes to have difficult conversations. And those courageous conversations can only happen if there's seeking an establishment of trust and a seeking of understanding. And so that's what we hope to bring today. So Ethan, with that, I would love for you to introduce yourself and maybe talk a little bit about your background and your journey here.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot, Derek, for having me. And thanks for having this platform to discuss this very necessary conversation. And, it's something uncomfortable. Nobody wants to talk about this, right? In fact, I think it's the actor Morgan Freeman was kind of famously quoted in saying the solution to racism is to stop talking about racism. But, you can't always ignore things and they go away, unfortunately. Although I do understand the sentiment of his quote there. So first of all, like, who am I? I'm certainly not a race expert or anything like that. I don't really think there is a such thing. But if there were one, it's certainly not me. This is the last thing I want to be talking about. As you know, I'm passionate about entrepreneurship and design and those types of things. But given my background, I went to high school in an inner city school, predominantly Black. But then I went to a predominantly white college, University of Georgia. So I've been in both of those worlds. I'm very blessed to have friends of diverse backgrounds, much like yourself. And these are very deep friendships, not just surface level friendships. And not just white and Black, but different cultures around the world. And I think that's quite an advantage to have the different perspectives and the respect, so that you get a full understanding of what's going on here. So I also have, in my past, I made a lot of mistakes as a youth, and I always wanted to be an artist. As I would say, I was literally a starving artist at one point and made bad decisions. And I was actually in jail twice before the age of 19. I've also been in the back of a police car more times than that. So I've had my run-ins with the law, and I've certainly defied authority. But at the same time, I've matured in life, and I'm talking about things that were 20 plus years ago. And I know I have ultimate respect for the police. And I have family members, my brother, I have two brothers in law enforcement, blood brothers, who are police officers or were police officers and have since gone on to go to like the federal level. And I understand both sides of it. So, I understand the angry side where, I've been violated by police officers wrongly. I've been in the wrong, but there's also times when I've been doing absolutely nothing and have been harassed because I'm a young Black man driving a nice car. Those types of things do happen. But I've also been rightly apprehended by police officers. And I understand on the police officer side, my brothers, they want to go home to see their families at night, and they're going to do what it takes to do that. And I'm glad that they do. And when things go wrong in my life, I call 911, and I'm glad that the police show up. So there's this, I don't know if it's a strength or a weakness, but I have the ability to empathize and understand both sides of a lot of the layers of what's going on here with this social unrest that is disrupting America at the moment. So that's a bit about my background as it relates to this conversation. And of course, not to mention, I also, as you can see from my skin color, you can surmise that I have a blended racial background. I've done a DNA test. I am 60% West African heritage and about 40% Northern European heritage. So, and I also have white people in my family. By marriage, I have an uncle who I'm very close to who's white. My sister-in-law is white. So, I understand this from many angles, from people I love, adore, and cherish. And we're able to sit down and have conversations like this and understand both sides of it. So I think that getting more people in the world to do that is one step towards solving this very layered and complicated issue.
Absolutely. It's funny you say that of like, and I think both of us are coming from slightly different perspectives, but in the same vein of kind of seeking to understand all the dynamics of it. And I won't even say each side, but really, I mean, like you said, it's multi-layered and there's a lot to it, and I think the hardest part is, the media, not to throw the media completely under the bus, but the media has to create an us versus them, this polarizing effect, which I think just exacerbates the problem of, I think the majority of America lives somewhere here in the middle and can kind of see both sides, but really doesn't have the venue to hear or learn or understand in a safe space, in a safe place. And so, what I know, I grew up in a very rural area that was not very racially diverse, went to a college that most of the diversity was more Indian and Asian versus African American. But like you said, through EO, through Entrepreneurs Organization, have met not only entrepreneurs of different races, but literally from around the world, where the cultural differences are drastically different. And so people like us approach those things with an intense sense of curiosity and look at it as an amazing asset that we all have differences of perspective and opinion. But it seems like right now, more and more things, you're either over here or over there, where the truth of the fact of the matter is it's a really complicated mix of all of those things.
Right. Exactly. And I think conversations like this are important. So to make the best use of your audience's time, I mean, let's dive in and answer those tough questions that people are scared to ask in public. Because I understand people don't want to say the wrong thing or be perceived a certain way, and at the same time they don't want to do nothing. So maybe we can tackle some of that stuff here, and I hope to deliver a lot of value in this hour, so that people can leave from here knowing what to do, and maybe at least having a better understanding of the full scope of what's going on, and then knowing how they can use that information to move forward in their respective life and their career and their industry and in their personal actions.
Yeah, absolutely. And we got a ton of questions from people that you can tell span across both sides of, if we were to say the polarization across both sides. Everything from, what are these protests really for? I think a lot of white America saw the protest as, hey, nobody's arguing with George Floyd's murder. Like, no one was defending that police officer. One of the questions. Let's see if I can find that specifically. To deny such things are happening today is extremely hypocritical, given that not one person defended George Floyd's murder. Some areas already determined police-free scenarios, and results are disastrous. As a comment of not only the protest being out of touch, but also this movement towards defunding the police. And it's interesting when I was having lots of conversations with friends and family and just acquaintances, when I think a lot of people saw the protest, and then also what that expanded into was different people of looters and rioters, but specifically the protest. I think a lot of people saw that as a protest against the murder of George Floyd and against the police of the Minneapolis police officers. But the more conversations that I've had with more people, it seems like that isn't just the case as far as what the reality of the protests are trying to accomplish. So, Ethan, I'd love for you to kind of talk to what are you hearing? What are you experiencing of, like, what's the point of these protests if not for coming, directly against the murder of George Floyd? Because obviously no one's defending that police officer, saying that was the right thing to do. Where in a lot of situations in the past, there were cases of police, brutality that you could say in the moment, in the situation, at that instant, maybe there was some cause for doubt. I don't think anybody saw that in this situation.
Right.
So what are you seeing as and hearing about as far as what are the protests for?
Yeah, certainly George Floyd's murder was the catalyst for this, but it's not an isolated incident by any means. And the issue is there's been a buildup of these things happening over and over and over again, whether justified or not. And I want to use that word justified very loosely, because even if there are murders where it's not quite cut and dry, it seems like, oh, well, he was doing this, he was resisting arrest, or he was fighting the police, and if that person gets killed in the process, then that doesn't necessarily mean it's justified. Because what's happening in the way, what these protests are fundamentally about, is that there's a contract of being an American. And I'm a very proud American. I love to be an American. I'm so happy that I was born in this country. It is an extreme blessing. That contract that we have, the Constitution, is that we all have these same inalienable rights. But the reality is, what comes through in actions is that it's not executed fairly, not always executed fairly. And there are tons and tons of videos, sadly, of murders and beatings where you can see that the person was 100% not doing anything or running away from the police. I know there are some with gray areas, like the most recent one in Atlanta, where the guy fired a taser back at police. But I mean, there's a video clip I have on my website where it's just back to back to back, and it's hard to watch, and it's extremely saddening. And we've just gotten to the point where we're like, enough is enough. And it's not just Black people, but it's people who see what's going on and decide to step up. So to paint a picture of exactly what happened here, I'm not sure, because I'm not sure if your audience understands the full sequence of events, which I think has been the perfect storm, which led to where we are today. But we have the backdrop of coronavirus, right? In March, and people are quarantined at home, and there are shelter-in-place orders, and of course, people are spending more time in their phones and on social media, and there are less distractions. Well, then you have, and forgive me, I may be getting this out of chronological order, but you have Breonna Taylor, a young Black lady who was at home in the bed with her boyfriend, and the police busted in unannounced and shot. And the boyfriend, they didn't know, he thought it was a robber, so he shot back to defend his home from the robbers, but it was really police officers who ended up killing his girlfriend, Breonna Taylor. It turns out that they had the wrong place, the wrong apartment, and they completely murdered her by mistake. And those police officers are still free to this day. And then we had the Amy Cooper incident in Central Park, where we saw a white woman call the police and tell a blatant lie on camera that she was being threatened by an African-American male. And that watching that video made me cringe, because had the police come and had been on high alert, who knows what could have happened if they made the wrong assumption about what that meant. He could have been beaten, shot, arrested, who knows. And she very callously told a lie on him. And then we saw the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, which is right here in my state of Georgia, about 300 miles away from me. The young Black boy who was out running, and he ended up being gunned down by two white men who initially they said that they suspected him of breaking and entering into a home that was under construction and being up to no good. But as the case has developed now, there's been testimony where it was a racially charged incident, because after they shot him at close range with a shotgun, they said a racial slur over his dead or dying body. And then after all of this, which we've all witnessed on our screens because we're at home due to coronavirus, then there's the brutal murder of George Floyd. And that just pushed everything through the roof, and people just hit the lid, because it took at least a week for that police officer to be arrested for his murder, for those police officers to be arrested for the murder. So I guess your question and what some people are expressing is, okay, well, now what? So that police officer's been arrested. Okay, case closed. Why are you guys still protesting, right? Okay, so let me paint a picture like this. And I'm gonna use a story here. It's a fictional metaphor, if you will. And let's say you own a dog. I don't know if you do or not, but let's say you're a dog owner, and you treat the dog pretty well, you feed it, but occasionally from time to time you kick the dog or you beat the dog. You treat it very unfairly, inhumanely, for years and years and years. And at some point, that dog is going to get fed up and snap back and bark, maybe bite at you and say, hey, dog lives matter, if he could talk, right? It's like, hey man, chill out, dog lives matter. So that's what's happening now. Like you got to stop. Black lives matter. We're screaming it. Like, I can't breathe. This man literally said, I can't breathe. And that's not the first I can't breathe incident where that was ignored and a person was killed by the police officer. But we're crying out for help. That's what Black Lives Matter is. And that's why the All Lives Matter thing has gotten some pushback, because in that scenario of the dog, wouldn't it sound ridiculous if the owner said, well, yeah, I know dogs' lives matter, but my life matters too. But no, that dog owner had been abusing the dog. And then that dog in that same scenario might lash out and start destroying the owner's stuff, maybe even destroying the owner's statues that resemble the owner's family members. You know, I mean, and you can say it's rational or not, but there's anger inside of that, and anger is not always rational. So I'm using it as a metaphor, but I don't want to equate anyone's life to that of an animal as a dog, because I think that that's demeaning. But I'm doing it to illustrate a point of the devaluing of a life, because whether we realize it or not, as human beings, we have this subconscious hierarchy of lives, sadly. Like if a cockroach was crawling across my desk right now, I would kill it without hesitation, and I would feel absolutely no remorse for it. That's because I value my life more than I value the cockroach's life, even though a cockroach probably isn't a threat to me. That's just kind of how we generally roll and operate in this society. Sadly, some people view Black lives as mattering less than white lives. And that's a generalization. I'm not saying everyone feels that way, but we've seen it on camera that some people feel that way, and it's become normalized. There's this TED Talk called Black Murder is Normal. I encourage everybody to go watch that TED Talk. It's very eye-opening. and unfortunately, a lot of the devaluing of our lives stems back to racism, and you're going back centuries and centuries of psychological just manipulation and being always felt as less than. And then if you see yourself as less than and other people see you as less than, then it seems like your life doesn't matter as much. So that's the scream, hey, Black lives matter. It's not to put anybody else down, but it's saying we matter. And I
Yeah,
hope,
and, and it's interesting, Ethan, on the all lives matter, pushback. It's because that was actually another question we got is how do we address the global issue of white privilege, not just Black lives, but Asian lives and Hispanic lives and all minorities, and and that's is also another question that I've also been asked is why in the history of our country, like many different minorities have faced prejudice. What makes it so much more difficult for African Americans to even get an even footing with other minorities? Because I know I've heard lots of people talk about how around World War II, Asians were tossed into what were essentially concentration camps in our country, and lots of other races have also faced pretty tragic prejudice. What makes it different? You touched on a little bit of kind of Black lives versus all lives when it's referencing white people, but what about Black lives versus other minorities? Because I think that's where a lot of people are getting hung up, is they feel like this has become really specific to a very specific piece of one group of people, and then allows them to dismiss the whole thing by saying, Black people only care about Black lives, and they don't care about Asian lives or Hispanic lives or any of these other things, which allows them to, I would say, psychologically or emotionally just dismiss the whole thing, because it's what's the difference if I'm saying all lives matter, including white people, including Black people, including Asian or Hispanic, where Black people, and there's a lot of pushback where people with good intentions will say all lives matter and then get dramatic pushback and dramatic, like basically being called a racist by saying, hey, don't all lives matter? So you touched a little bit on kind of the difference between, the dog owner scenario and kind of in a Black versus white, but what about in, minority to minority?
yeah, and that's a great question, great point. And I'll say it like this, and I've heard this analogy drawn. If in my neighborhood here, if my house is on fire and my house is the only house on the block that's on fire, then I call the fire department and say, hey, help, my house matters. Is it right? My neighbors can't say, well, my house matters too. No, my house is the one on fire. So to answer your question, it's Black Lives Matter right now. If I, for lack of a better way of putting it, in this moment right now, it's Black Lives Matter, because I don't know about you, but let me know if when you look at the news, how many other races have you seen being killed by police officers on camera? And I've seen countless Black people killed on camera. I personally, maybe it's out there, I've never seen any white person, Hispanic person, and I haven't looked for it either, but it just seems to be very prevalent that Black Lives Matter, and we need to do something about this. This is the house that's on fire at this moment. Of course, all lives matter,
Right.
but it's just not the time to say that right now.
Well, and that is an interesting point you bring up on like police deaths, because what also I've heard people dismiss things about is, a cop kills a white kid and it doesn't make the news. And that's why no one does see it, because it's local news maybe, but definitely not national news. And so the question of why is it a hate crime if a white cop kills a Black man, but what if it's a Black cop that kills a white man? Why is that not a hate crime? Why is that any different? Why is that not hypocritical? And I think that's kind of in that same vein as all lives matter, right? Is in that instance, they're saying, hey, that white kid's life matters just as much as that Black kid's life. But it doesn't get the media attention, so no one actually sees it.
Yeah, and I think what's happened here is we have a lot of, there are different issues. There's police brutality, abusing of authority in general. That's against all races, all people. Some police, unfortunately, abuse their authority. That's kind of gotten lumped in with under this Black Lives Matter umbrella. So it makes everything seem racial. So even if it isn't racial, because that stuff does happen. Heck, I've been harassed by Black police officers. So it's not always a cut and dry racial thing. We don't even know if the Derek Chauvin, George Floyd incident was racially charged. We don't know
Right.
that 100%. They may have had some personal, they knew each other. You know, we know that they worked at a club together at some point. And as the details of the case unfold, we may find out that there was more to it. And it wasn't just a clear-cut black and white thing. Unfortunately, it makes it easier to see when it is black and white. But I think that there's one issue with the police enforcement, which is being addressed, and that's part of the protest. And I didn't fully answer your first question, which is why are we still protesting? But we are protesting not just about George Floyd and that justice being served in that case, but also let's fix the system so that it stops happening. And that's why the protests keep happening, because we need to fix the system in different areas, in legislative areas, and in education, and you know, and a lot of it has to do with in our own homes. We need to fix the systemic racism, which has led to this. If the two are married together, but it does seem that way. Is comprised of many things. So since this happened, it's kind of spiraled into, okay, we need to fix the police problem, and we need to fix this, and we need to fix that, and we need to fix this, and we need to fix that. Right. Before, you know, then this is one step forward. I mean, this isn't the first time there have been protests. There have been protests and riots and stuff all for decades now. And every time it happens, there's a little bit of progress made. And then things get quiet, and then something else happens, and then there's protests, and then a little bit of progress gets made. And I think that this time it's different, because there'll be a lot more progress. A lot more progress has already been made. I know that President Trump signed the police reform order. I know that in different states and jurisdictions, different laws have been put into place. So progress is happening. It's a gradual thing. But that's why the protests are still happening.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. You know, and that's where, I'll kind of circle back on the police brutality and the racial profiling. And a lot of people will point to the statistics, right? Of, the jails are filled with young Black men. Most of crime is committed on a percentage basis by young Black men. And therefore, with limited police resources, why shouldn't they be focusing where the problem is? And this is where, once again, standing in the middle and understanding, seeing the logic, from both sides, one side saying, hey, this is a good use of resources to focus where the problem is. And the other side is saying it's inherent, the problem is being kind of self-perpetuated, like you said, systemically, because you're going to find what you look for. And no matter where you focus your time, your energy, and your effort, you're going to find the good and the bad or the indifferent. Whatever you look for, you're going to see. And so by turning the lens there, they're inherently seeing it. And like you said, like there's some legislative and some other things. I mean, I think a perfect example, that I've used with people is, marijuana. Like, what percentage of young Black men are in jail on marijuana charges? And then all of a sudden, with the legislative stroke of the pen, now it's legal in many states, and now entrepreneurs, and once again, predominantly white entrepreneurs, are now all of a sudden getting rich off of selling marijuana. And, these are the sorts of things that it's above my pay grade on trying to answer, but I totally can see both sides and figuring out and seeing and understanding that this is really complicated. But would love to hear what your thoughts are on, like people will say, like, I've heard stereotypes happen for a reason, right? Is that there's percentages behind it, there's experiences behind it. But how is that counterbalanced with you're going to get what you look for?
Yeah, that's a heavy and loaded question. And yeah, you presented multiple sides to that, and the answer is yes. it's all right. You know, unfortunately, and you have to look at this at a micro lens. You know, and I can speak from my own experience. Well, let's hone in on stereotypes for a minute, because I think that um, stereotypes, racial profiling is what leads to a lot of the issues that we have, where people make snap judgments. Let's say police, for example, approach a scene and they feel more threatened because of the appearance of who's there. And then if they're more threatened, the adrenaline levels higher, the
Right.
fear
It
levels
escalates
higher,
quickly.
it escalates quickly, and somebody ends up dead. And that unfortunately happens too much to people of darker skin. Now, um, I don't know the reason why darker skin seems to be statistically more fearful. Or is it? Maybe there are other clues in the appearance. For example, me, like if I'm dressed the way I'm dressed and you approach me on the street, are you going to feel threatened? And you see my hands exposed, and you're not going to feel threatened at all, right? But even if it's me, same exact person, and you know, I'm wearing a hoodie and I got my hands in my pockets, and you know, I'm dressed a certain way. Unfortunately, people do judge a book by its cover. We do it as a survival mechanism because we are human beings. And it shouldn't be that way. I have the right to wear a hoodie. I have the right to wear what I want to wear. It's one of my American rights. But unfortunately, people do make snap judgments based on your appearance. And unfortunately, skin color is just but one of
Right.
many when you're assessing a situation and you're thinking to yourself, am I safe here?
You know,
It
it's
could,
funny. You say that because it reminds me of an experience I had. My wife and I were in Chicago a few years ago, and you know, we went out with some friends, and we're walking back to our hotel, and you know, had that like corner glance. We walked by in the kind of little like stepped lobby area of a building. There was three guys standing there, and had that like awkward eye contact, and all of a sudden they started moving, and my wife and I, and this was, you know, 1 o'clock, 1:30 in the morning, there wasn't that many people out on the street, and all of a sudden they started moving and looked back over my shoulder, and they're walking behind me, and you know, all of a sudden, you know, hairs on the back of my neck are standing a little bit, and I kind of, you know, not wanting to scare my wife, but like, all right, let's pick up the pace a little bit.
Mhm.
We crossed the street, they crossed the street, I'm like, oh boy, here we go. And finally, there was another couple that also were we saw ahead, and so we picked up the pace even more and kind of caught up to them. And by that time, that that couple had, or that those three guys had went down a different street, but
Mhm.
we were scared, uh, and it was three white guys, but it
Mhm.
was three white guys in these same outfits that you exactly described, hoodies
Mhm.
up. They were kind of like hunched over, you know, baggier jeans, like that. Once again, stereotype, right? But apparel is one stereotype. And for the longest time, I know I thought exactly what you said is, hey, it's about how you present yourself is where those stereotypes come into play. And, you know, that how you present yourself is really, and unfortunately, like if you're a white guy, black guy, Hispanic guy, whatever, you know, there's certain dress stereotypes that are going to elevate that
Yeah.
those heighten those fears. But then I, you know, through all of this and talking with a lot of my friends who, you know, a lot of black friends who are super successful, super educated, and you know, hearing their stories about, you know, being pulled over in their neighborhoods, driving their SUV, like with their kids in the back,
Mhm.
and the cops saying, "Hey, you know, is this your car? You don't look like you belong here." You
Right.
know, and this is, you know, a friend of mine who is a CPA, has his MBA, and actually is in Minneapolis, not too far from where George Floyd happened.
Mhm.
You know, and one of my African American employees, you know, was in one of our on our real estate company, was talking about, hey, you know, I was saying like there's construction, you know, you can explore and kind of figure out which is the best way to get to this to that property. And he's like, people like me don't explore in places like this, and I
Yeah.
didn't even like wouldn't have thought about it, and that made me kind of reconsider the that dress is the only thing that matters on those stereotypes, and that, and kind of like you said, it's the color of your skin may not be the only thing, but that's kind of one piece of, in that metaphor, one piece of clothing that is a ding against you.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is the case. So that's where I think it comes into, well, this whole defund the police situation, which you're talking about, which for the record, I think is just kind of a very poor term to use. I know we're going to talk about that in a minute. I do want to address a question. I see a question in the chat about what is the responsibility of leaders, entrepreneurs, and business owners in building a more equitable and anti-racist economy and job force. And I know we're going to get to that in this conversation,
Yep.
but I think we could address it now. And I want to tell you guys a story, and this is a true story. When I was in high school, I remember it was in like 9th or 10th grade, and I was always the smallest like kid in the school. I was younger than everybody. I was tiny, you know. I mean, I'm still not a big guy, but I was super tiny in like 9th grade. And I remember this guy came up to me in the hallway, and he had like 6 of his friends with him. And for some reason, I don't even remember now, but he said he was going to fight me after school. This is like your classic high school movie stuff, right? But it really happened to me. It's like, hey man, we're going to kick your butt after school in different words. And you need to, at the bus stop, you know, in the bus loading zone, meet me there. And now logic would have said, okay, well, don't meet him there. But I lived 20 miles away from my school, and the bus was my only way home. This was a space where I had to go at the end of the day. I didn't want to be a punk and tell teachers or administrators what was happening. So throughout this whole day, I'm kind of dreading getting to the end of the day, because I'm like, okay, these 6 guys are going to jump me. And, you know, I really don't stand a chance. What am I going to do? I just got to fight, I guess. Well, little did I know that word was kind of spreading around the school about what happened, because this happened in the hallway and people were talking. So they're like, oh yeah, so-and-so said they're going to jump Ethan after school, blah, blah, blah. So I'm thinking like, oh great. Well, now I'm going to have an audience while I get jumped. But when I got there to the bus loading zone, this guy that I know, his name is Dewan Anderson. And he's one of those guys. He was on the football team, and in high school, same age, he was about 6'3", 250 pounds. Big guy.
Not the same size.
But he was like, he defended. He was like, nobody's going to mess with Ethan. You got to go through me. And he had like 8 other football players with him. All guys that I didn't know. I only loosely knew Dewan as an acquaintance, but he went out and became an ally for me. And I'm so thankful. Nothing happened because those other guys saw the football players were my allies. They were like, okay, they left me alone. They never messed with me again. And I don't even know to this day. I mean, Dewan and I are Facebook friends, but we don't really keep in touch. And he probably doesn't even remember that day, but it stuck with me. And because it made a difference in my life could have ended up very differently had I gotten in a fight that day. Who knows? It could be crippled, you know, who knows? So I'm very thankful to him for being an ally. He didn't have to do that. And certainly the other football players that he recruited to help me, they didn't know me. They could have easily been like, I don't have anything to do with that. I'm, you know, why am I going to show up to defend this guy? I don't even know him. But they did. So they became allies. And that is what's happening now. We need allies. We're seeing more and more allies around the world. There've been protests on 3 continents. And that is what we can all do in our businesses. And the question is, well, what do you do? And I even faced it in my business, because after this stuff happened and people were protesting, I'm here in Atlanta and I'm thinking to myself, man, should I be protesting? Like, should I get my kids and go downtown and hold up signs and protest? And I'm like, no, that doesn't seem like it's the right fit for me. But then I saw an entrepreneur who I know loosely, who owns a restaurant in Atlanta. And what she decided to do was put her food truck next to the voter line on the voting day. And because we had very long lines, a lot of people turned out to vote. People were in line for 2 hours. So she parked her food truck there and fed the voters as they were in line. I think some or all of it was, you know, she donated some of it. So I was like, oh, wow, she used her business, her superpower, to help in her own unique way. So what I decided to do in my company, we make custom clothing, T-shirts, jackets, that type of thing. So we released a line of T-shirts and so forth that had statements on it, about, we have like a whole page of them. Of course, Black Lives Matter is one, but like no racist police. It's very specific statements about fighting for racial justice. I don't believe that they're one-sided statements, but we're taking all of the proceeds from those shirts and donating them to organizations that are fighting for the cause. We have like 5 different organizations and that we vetted and researched, and we made sure that this money is going specifically to combat police injustice, police accountability. And that's my way of protesting. So that's what I think every business should be thinking about and doing. Well, one, are you going to be an ally or are you not going to be an ally? Are you going to be forgotten about, or are you going to be the Dewan Anderson in people's lives and be the business that's remembered for standing up on the right side of justice and helping someone that needs your help? Or are you going to choose to not do that? Because not doing that can be detrimental, especially in this cancel culture. And then how do you do it? Well, you got to look at your own specific business. And I think people should do it in their own specific strong suit. Where can your business deliver the most value? And it's not always just donating money or protesting. Right. There's some unique angle you can take, like the girl with the food truck. But just think about how you could use your business to impact one of these multiple layers of the problem that's going on, so we can, make this country what it's supposed to be.
Yeah. And Ethan, I think that's a great point. And that's, I think the same approach that we've taken at Go Brand Go is, how can we be an ally and like you said, leverage our superpowers? And so at Go Brand Go, we talk about wanting to foster empowerized leadership to spark transformational change. So for us, it's not about getting out there and being at the front line of the protest. Instead, it's about how do we empowerize others to do it even better. And the first step we did was had internal conversations with our team. Like, what is that dynamic? How does it play out? Because we've got all races, multiple races, multiple genders, multiple sexual orientations. Like, so we've got a I'll say fairly diverse team. They're still predominantly white, but what we looked at and said, okay, what else can we do? And this conversation was one of them, is that we've got a platform and we've got connections, and we can have the ability to have conversations that other people frankly can't. And so if we can be a part of the solution and help others see what conversations can and should happen as a part of that. And the third thing we did is there's an organization out of Wilmington, North Carolina called True Colors Brewery. A great organization that is employing active gang members, and they're actually becoming owners of the organization. And it's the only rules of employment is that you have to be an active gang member and you can't be involved with any gun activity. And so they're getting active gang members to come together and work together and realize that they've got more in common than they have differences. Just because they're on this street versus that street, just because they wear this color versus that color, the fact of the matter is there's so much more in common than they originally thought. And the gun violence in Wilmington has dropped dramatically because of these efforts. And so we're working with their leaders and their marketing team. And the easy thing would say, hey, we're going to do some pro bono services. That leaves them right back, in the same spot as they are in a few months from now. And so what we're actually doing is we're going to work with their marketing team to elevate their abilities and their skills. And so that is, once again, fostering that empowerized leadership so that they can become even better versions of themselves with it.
Love it. Yeah.
The thing that I know I've heard with all of this is a lot of white people who want to help but don't know how to help are also afraid to help, because frankly, what they see on social media and in the media is, kind of scary, from the standpoint of if you say the wrong thing or come off a little bit, as far as like we talked about earlier, something that seems innocent, all lives matter, seems like they're supporting minorities, all of a sudden they get this huge blowback. And so what ends up happening is they retreat back to, their original stances and their original positions. And one of the questions that was posed is, it seems like when white people are trying to engage and understand, but immediately get brushed aside with comments of, you just don't get it, that's just your white privilege coming out.
Mm.
And, and so once again, they just choose not to engage, and it's oftentimes, it's ironic that in instances where, and it goes on in the question, it seems like just the same as most other issues with liberals, is that you're allowed to have any opinion as long as it's theirs. And if you don't completely agree or have a different perspective, you're dismissed as an idiot instead of both sides willing to engage in a conversation and learning from each other. And
Right.
so, and once again, see both sides of this, is that there's a fear of engaging, because if you don't do it just right, you get you get your hand slapped, or even worse.
Mhm.
But if you don't do it, I guess the second part of that is, what's the cost of passivity, of doing nothing?
Yeah. In this day and age, Ellie just posted in the chat about cancel culture, and that's the way things are going right now. And you do face the real threat of people basically boycotting. That's what cancel culture is. It's the more modern day term. That's how I interpret it. But you got to look at your character. It's the equivalent of just standing by and watching somebody being beat down, like my high school story. Like the people who were lined up on the walls, just who would have just watched the fight if it happened and not done anything. What type of human being is that? So if your business chooses to not do anything, because a business is an entity, that's why we call them entities, and people are entities. So if you don't do anything, then you're seen in the same light as those bystanders who do absolutely nothing. So I mean, and I think people shouldn't be as worried about doing the wrong thing or saying the wrong thing, but do something. Even if you say, I don't know what to do, but I know that what's happening is not right and I want to be helpful. At least if you say something, then people will understand, like, okay, I get it. You're not privy to the knowledge. You didn't have my life experience. I get that you don't get it. I respect you for saying that. Here are some things maybe you can do. Even I've said that. I'm a Black man, but I've even said, I don't really know what to do. And somebody pointed out to me, hey, you're a business leader. You past president of EO. You can help mentor other business owners. If you want to make it Black business owners right now who need your help, maybe they're Black businesses who actually got destroyed from the looting that happened. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, yes, that happened. The looting, by the way, looting is something that we don't condone, something completely separate. There's protesting, there's rioting, there's looting. And, peaceful protesting is really the only thing that is kosher. So yeah, lots of businesses got destroyed by looting, and I can step in by helping them rebuild, helping mentor young entrepreneurs, helping them, grooming them, teaching them things that I've learned in my 17 years of entrepreneurship. So I think it's everybody using their own unique skill set, and then you don't worry about doing something wrong, because there is no wrong as long as you are trying to help. Don't worry about being criticized for that.
Right. Well, and one of the other questions that a business owner wrote in with was that they hire the best candidate for each role and promote top performers regardless of race, religion, or sexual orientation. They don't see themselves as racist, but sometimes get the feeling from all of this that if not hiring or promoting minorities, even if they aren't the most qualified candidate, that all of a sudden they're a part of the problem, which they don't agree or understand. So, and it's kind of like the quota system, right? Is like, where does the responsibility as a business owner of providing equal opportunities balance out with, is equal, I've heard equal and equity are two different things, right? Equality and equity. Where is the line between, giving opportunities, but also, both of us own small businesses, and like, you can't have, you need to have the most qualified candidate you can get in every role and every position at all times, regardless of.
Right.
And so where is that line between giving opportunities, but not giving special treatment?
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I do not advocate just promoting someone purely because of skin color or any other type of gender. In a small business, it needs to be merit based. It needs to be skill based. But I think it's a responsibility of a small business owner to document well and to train well. outside of racial issues or gender discrimination issues, you should be doing that anyway. It's just good business practices. So that you can point out to someone, here are the areas where you need more development. And that's why I can't promote you to this next level until you check these boxes. And the next person who you do promote, maybe they've checked all those boxes, so that you can easily show that it has nothing to do with your skin color, your gender, your sexual preference, or anything like that. Does that answer your question? Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah. Well, and one of the attendees just asked, like, how do you expand the pool of qualified candidates and making sure that recruitment is, doesn't, even if your hiring and promotion process is fair and equitable, is what does it look like to make sure that the pool of applicants is coming from as diverse pool as possible? I know for us at Go Brand Go, it's, we post on LinkedIn, and we post, and send out emails, and we recruit from technical schools. But those aren't always the most diverse areas. And then, where does the responsibility of going above and beyond of trying to, once again, not go past, the normal processes of, I think that's where most people do, is they do LinkedIn and Facebook and some other social media sites, which inherently reinforces whatever your community already is by its very nature. And that's probably one of the biggest challenges with social media in general, is it's an echo chamber of what's already around you. And so, where's the responsibility? Because as we all know, small business owners are already stretched for knowledge and capacity and abilities. And, I know a lot of small business owners are like, one more thing, I can't even like hardly make payroll every other Friday as is. And now I've got to add this to my list of things. Like,
yeah. It's very stressful, man. 2020 is the most exhausting year.
Crazy.
Can all say, but yes, that's important. To answer that question, I would say, and I've experienced this in my business, if you have job listings out there and you seem to be getting the same types of candidates from the same racial backgrounds, gender backgrounds, whatever it is, I would suggest taking that job posting and having somebody else read it and see, maybe there's some language in there that you may be blind to and not even realize, but just the natural way that you write, the natural way that you talk is maybe going to appeal to a certain audience and attract them to apply at your job. Whereas another demographic reading that might say, oh, that's not the place for me, on a subconscious level.
Yeah. Well, in the same way that you write a job post for a salesperson much differently than you do for a controller, like you're going to build in different languages to attract those different types of people. And I think, I saw a graphic recently that talked about the difference between homogeneous cultures, heterogeneous cultures, and inclusive cultures. That homogeneous is all one. Heterogeneous is like there's a Venn diagram of everyone brings their own unique stuff. And a equitable, like integrated culture is where everyone gets to be them, and it's part of what makes the organization great. And I think in the same way that a sales-based organization, an engineer-based organization, a financially driven organization all has different strengths and abilities versus their competitor, I think we're going to find more and more that an integrated, equitable workforce is going to give you advantages, because the heterogeneous experiences bring much different innovation and much different experiences that are more wide swaths of things. And if you can do that in a way that doesn't, you do that in a way that also gives you the benefits of a homogeneous culture, the combination of those two is kind of a superpower for an organization.
Definitely.
One of the last questions on business that we got is, where is the line between a business owner and their employees? So the question was, what is, the personal and professional, do best to support my Black employees, give them the space to work through what they need to in tough times, being conscious of the fact that work still needs to be done and deadlines need to be hit. So where is, the line of being, I would say, culturally conscious, but also, like, and especially in small businesses, you can't afford for a section of employees, regardless of the situation, to all of a sudden kind of check out emotionally or from a productivity standpoint. So, how do you, as a small business owner, gauge that line of holding an employee accountable, but also understanding the current situation and being supportive, but also as a manager still having to get the outcomes that are needed and required out of the roles?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And to answer that, I would say you treat the things that are going on culturally and in society that impact your team members the same way you treat anything else in their personal lives that impacts their work performance. Because whether we like it or not, it's tough for us as human beings to completely compartmentalize our personal lives from our work life. And we spend half of our waking life at work. So it's important to have that community aspect, have that family aspect. And our team members do look to us as their leaders in, somewhat of a parental role. They expect us to care about what's going on in their personal life. And it might not have anything to do with racial injustice. They might have, a family member who's dealing with a terminal illness or something, and that
Right.
they're thinking about it at work, and that's affecting their productivity. So you care about that, and you acknowledge it. You talk about it. Of course, they still need to get their work done, but it's all about showing compassion about the things that are going on in your team members' personal lives, whether it has to do with general society at large or not.
Yeah, that's I totally agree with that. And so, even as we're wrapping up, I think a lot of what I keep hearing is, I don't really know what to do. And that's what, in general, people want to be part of the solution, but I would say are still somewhat afraid of just going all in on things. And so you talked a little bit as like business owners, what they can do, but if you could kind of sum up, maybe just some, perspectives or some action items on, because I think you and I both are in agreement on this, is like, not all of us need to be at a level 10, but if
Right.
all of us come from a 0 to a 2, a 3, or even a 4, that's how real progress gets made, right? It's not by a few people being super passionate. It's by the base and a lot of people actually making movement forward and getting the things going. So, in closing, like, how would you recommend our listeners, what are the small steps that they can take to make forward progress and make things happen?
Sure. Yeah. So I just want to leave you guys with like 4 action tips that I think everyone should be taking here. This is by no means a comprehensive list, but I think that it's a starting point. One, let's focus, and this is a mindset thing. Let's focus on what makes us the same instead of focusing on differences. Because if you think about it, human beings, we're more alike than we are different. In fact, scientists say that our DNA is actually 99.9% the same for all human beings. And think about things that you enjoy doing. Everybody I know enjoys vacations, enjoys being with their loved ones, enjoys eating a good meal, enjoys having their freedoms. These are things that we have in common. So let's focus on that and let's minimize the differences. The second thing is filter your media intake. And there's this thing called confirmation bias. And what's happening is, especially nowadays with social media, it's personalized. And what you see on your feed is only going to reinforce things that you already believe. And even on TV, depending on which news channel you watch, you're going to be more comfortable watching the news channel that already reinforces what you already believe. So it's this constant feedback loop, and you think anything else is absolutely stupid. Anybody that disagrees with you is stupid. Well, guess what? They're experiencing the same thing. Their feed, their news channel is showing them this side. You're looking at the same scene from 2 different angles. The media is injecting opinions. Your Facebook friends are injecting their opinions, and you're getting your news filtered. So what I did to combat that was, you know what? I said, I'm going to subscribe to both. Let's just call them out, CNN and Fox. I watch both of them. I subscribe to both of them because I want to see for myself and understand both angles. On my Facebook feed, I have very right-wing people, very left-wing people, some in the middle. I read all of them. I try to understand their point of view. Whether I agree or disagree, I try not to inject my emotion into it, but just try to understand it. And I think if more people did that without just shutting down anything that they don't agree with, it would be a step forward in progress. Another thing, the third thing you do is develop deep friendships with people of other cultures, other races, things like we have. And somebody might say, well, how do you do that? I don't have any friends who are white. I don't have any friends who are black. I highly recommend that people join organizations where you do have a common ground. Like you and I, our common ground is entrepreneurship. We met through EO, Entrepreneurs Organization. We also have a common ground of travel because that's part of how the organization runs since it's global. You could join a sports team or type of organization where you have that commonality of people with different cultures and you get to know them really well. Interest groups, a tennis club, a golf club, a travel group, whatever. Seek out those type of common interests and get to know someone on a deep level from a different culture. And then the last thing, which I mentioned before, is in your business, figure out what's your superpower, what's your niche, what service do you offer that you can apply to one of the many problems that we're facing, whether it be unequal education or police reform or systemic racism. What we have quite a few problems going on in this country that your superpower can help in some way. And you're doing it right now, Derek, with hosting these webinars and choosing to have this difficult conversation and sharing this with the world. You're using your superpower right now. So this is a prime example of that.
Awesome. Ethan, those are great tips and hopefully things that people will put into action because, and I think you hit it on the head, especially with, I think what a lot of people get paralyzed is they see the whole tangled web of problems and then all of a sudden they try to solve them all. I think the key on your step 4 there is pick one. What's one problem that you can move the needle on just a little bit and start there. And I think if we all collectively do that, and that this is in a somewhat all lives matters scenario, not just in racial tensions, not just in these specific problems, but just in general, the problems that face us as societies, as a world. You can take that all the way to climate change and water scarcity and all across the board. Like this is one section of problems that the world has, that the United States has. And as business owners, as entrepreneurs, as leaders, it's our responsibility to turn the energy that we create from our organizations back into positive impact in the world. And choose a problem and make an impact. And don't get too caught up on trying to solve the whole problem. Just make a little movement on one area.
That's right. That's right. Well,
so Ethan, I want to thank you again for your candor, your experiences, your trust in me, and having these difficult conversations that, once again, I know a lot of people are asking and a lot of people are afraid to have this conversation in public. So thank you for being willing to give your time to us and all the attendees. And this was, I hope, super helpful. I know it was really enlightening for me, even though we've had multiple of these types of conversations. Every time we talk, I learn something new. So I appreciate your time today.
Yeah, same here. Thank you so much. Thank you for doing this. Thank you, Ellie, Judy, everybody in the chat here. I appreciate your questions over here and your feedback. Please take this and share it, because the more people we can open their eyes to this type of stuff, the more difference we'll make.